Let's open up the Black Series Archive 6-inch figure of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Villa Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. When it comes to the Black Series line of Star Wars 6-inch figures, I really love the Archive line because it gives me a second chance at owning figures that I might not have been able to find here in New Zealand during their initial run. And there's something about this more minimal style of packaging that I feel quite more at ease opening to add these figures to my display. I have quite a few Black Series figures going all the way back to some of the original older packaging styles. And for me personally, the older the packaging, the less likely I am about opening it. So if I'm really thinking about opening a figure, I try and find the most recent release of it, because sometimes we get them on these archive cards which are minimal and I don't mind opening them. And we also do get sometimes a little bit of an update on the paint, especially around the face, which is the case for this Grand Admiral Thrawn figure. I'm such a big fan of Grand Admiral Thrawn. It's really fun to see quite a few collectibles of him nowadays, of course, ever since he first appeared in the Timothy Zahn novels all the way back in the early 90s. Then he reappeared in the Rebels animated series and now the Ahsoka live action series. So I'm excited to add yet another Grand Admiral Thrawn figure to my collection. I can't wait to open him up. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take a closer look at the figure and his one blaster accessory, and we'll check out all of the details. But first, let's take a quick look at the packaging. The simple style of the Archive backing card really makes this one a perfect opener in my opinion. We have a mostly black backing card with a light grey panel that is behind the figure and extends out to the right side where we have the text Archive written here. We have the Star Wars Black Series logo on the top right. We have a cutout section here for the hanger, of course for the toy stores, and we've got an interesting little angular cutout here on the left edge of the backing card, which is echoed with this kind of cut off corner for the bubble itself. We have the character name written down the left side, Grand Admiral Thrawn, in a fun gold toned font there, not foiled, just sort of a gold color there, which matches the 50 Lucasfilm emblem that we have here on the top left there as well. We've got a little bit of a black cardboard insert inside the front of the bubble with some really nice artwork of the character. We've got Grand Admiral Thrawn here with his arms crossed across his chest there, really quite fun. And then of course we have the figure. I really like the light background, really helps the figures stand out. Of course, if they were full black, some characters like Darth Vader would blend a little bit into the background, but Thrawn with his white uniform there and a bright blue skin stands out quite nicely. We only have one accessory here. Thrawn is more about words and a strategy than he is about actually picking up a blaster, but we still have one accessory there. We can also see that he's got a holster there as well, so I'm excited to check that out later. Moving on to the back, we have that same artwork from that cardboard insert inside the bubble here, larger on the back, really nice there. And we also have the Star Wars Black Series logo here. Now if we take a quick look and a bit of comparison to a standard Archive Black Series card, you can see here on the back of this C-3PO example that we have an image of C-3PO during his original release in the black and red style packaging here from 2016. We also have a blurb in a few different languages, and then the rest of it is just copyright and warning text. Now because this Grand Admiral Thrawn figure was released for the 50 Years of Lucasfilm collection, we don't have that preview image there of earlier releases. This particular Thrawn figure was originally released in 2017, first as a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive with some really cool packaging and accessories, and then later on in the same black and red packaging style that we see here for C-3PO. Now, of course, it kind of is a bit of a shame that we don't have those images there. Even though I open them up, I do keep my backing cards and I like those little nods to earlier versions there. So instead of the image of the original packaging style, we have a blurb for Grand Admiral Thrawn, and of course we have this timeline for the 50 years of Lucasfilm with a little bit of a commemorative sentence here. It says, commemorate the first 50 years of Lucasfilm with figures inspired by their Star Wars animated series. We can see that they have highlighted the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels because of course Grand Admiral Thrawn at this time when this figure was released was from Star Wars Rebels. Of course we now have him in the live action Ahsoka series. We have a blurb here, a little bit short. It reads, Thrawn was a male chiss with striking blue skin, red eyes, and an angular face, known for his brilliant strategic mind and ruthlessness. So it's a little bit more about his actual appearance rather than the character, and doesn't really sort of dive into the books or anything like that. But I do like blurbs on Star Wars character packaging. I think that that's fun. As I said earlier, I do find the simpler packaging style of the archive cards perfect for openers. I don't really mind opening these ones up, even though I do keep the backing cards. Somehow the boxes seem a little bit more sentimental to me now, because of course they are a few generations back in terms of Black Series packaging. So I'm not really keen to actually open up my black and red boxes anymore. So I'm glad that Hasbro is re-releasing some really cool characters so that I can open them up and add them to my display. So let's get stuck in and open up this Grand Admiral Thrawn 6-inch figure. Now I have the Grand Admiral Thrawn 6-inch figure and his one blaster accessory out of the packaging, so we can go over all of the details. And first things, he stood up straight away, nice and sturdy, very solid, really nice to see. Sometimes I got to spend a little bit of time just tweaking the legs and articulation to get characters to stand up, but he stood up nice and straight, very robust, not even a wobble there. Now this figure is one of those ones where I'm not sure if I'm going to love it. I love the character, but there are a few things about this particular figure that I really want to see up close. That's why I love doing deep dives with my action figures. I really want to sort of test out all of the articulation, take a closer look at the details and the paint job, and sort of come to my conclusion once I've really had a hands-on look here. So the main thing that's kind of, I know already, is going to bother me a little bit about this figure is because while we do have a new updated face paint compared to the original version, we've got really nice face paint here. This one, of course, is the same sculpt as the original version from 2017, and that means the old style of knee articulation, which I don't like. I like that Hasbro has changed away from this. We've got a much cleaner articulation style for knees. I don't like these kind of three parts here with the kneecaps. We've got these really obvious sort of pinholes here in the sides, which with his sort of wide flared Imperial pants, they do go in quite deep, and I'm not a fan of that. But I'm hoping that some of the other details about this are really going to make me love this figure, even though I know I don't like those knee joints. They do sort of stand out to me a little bit. Now, one thing that I really notice when I get them out of the plastic and under the lights, I can really see the difference in the plastics used for this figure. So of course you will probably be familiar with when we have shirts and solid things, we've got a completely rigid plastic, but then when we move down to the thighs, in order to be able to flex at the hips, Hasbro generally uses more of a rubbery, flexible plastic, which means two different plastics. Now, generally, if there is a difference in the top and the bottom, you can get away with a color difference, but white is one of those colors where you really read with your eyes when it's not right. And this white is whiter and cleaner in appearance than the white used for the solid parts of the body. So this section is giving me just a little bit more of a skirt appearance, because it feels just a little bit separate to the other parts, because this is all the same rigid plastic, and this is supposed to be sort of all part of the tunic, but because this is a flexible plastic, it's just a slightly different color, and it's really showing up under the lights. If this was a different color, it might not be so bad, but white is one of those ones. Whites and blacks, you can really tell if they're different. It's not too bad. I didn't immediately notice it through the plastic, but just under strong lighting, I can just sort of see the differences there. Of course, we're going to have a little bit of a texture difference as well, but that's more what I can feel rather than what I'm seeing. So I can really feel the difference between this plastic and this plastic, of course, because it's flexible and this is completely robust. But anyway, let's go through like usual, and I'm going to start with the face. So having seen images online of the original release of this Thrawn, I was very jealous. I love that packaging for the original San Diego Comic-Con exclusive version with all of those cool little accessories. I really like the fact that this new archive version of it has an upgraded photorealistic paint job compared to those older versions, which is especially noticeable around the eyebrows. The eyebrows were thicker and more sort of solid on older versions, a little bit more sort of painted on, and the eyes, of course, we love the new sort of digital printing with the detail that we get on the eyes. They're just nicely set in and they don't sort of spill out, and of course we get some really fine detail on eyes now. I really like the eyebrows. It gives him a really sort of calculating, sort of scheming appearance appearance. Now this one is of course based off the animated Rebels version of Grand Admiral Thrawn, but in a realistic style. Like the rest of the Black series, we don't get sort of animated style Black series. Everything's sort of done in a realistic style, so it looks really cool when you line up everything regardless of the source material. So I like that even though this is from the animated series Rebels, it looks realistic. So the face likeness is not exactly a true likeness to anyone or any sort of rendition specifically. It's kind of like an interpretation of the angular features from the show, but I feel like it's just a good all-round appearance of Grand Admiral Thrawn for me, especially when I think about sort of book and comic art. I always think of him as being very angular with his features, and especially now since Rebels, we can see that we've kind of got those forehead details sculpted in there. He's got a little bit of a cheekbone sort of cut in. Of course, he is Chiss, which is technically an alien species, even though they do just look like blue-skinned humans. But I like that we've got some really sort of striking facial sculpt details coming in here as well. The hair is sculpted as one piece with the head not separately applied. Pretty tidy paint job, except for just one tiny little section here. Very, very minimal. I'm looking up really close. It's just like a tiny little black, sort of like a little bit of overspray there that's just coming down below the hairline. Other than that, it looks pretty tidy. We can see that in the back. His hair's short, so I can see the articulation of the neck there, just tucked away there in the back. I'm not really going to see that once it's on display. Now, let's just quickly test out his head articulation. He's got kind of an angular jawline here, which looks like we're not going to get too much movement really. That hair is hitting there in the back. Kind of feels somehow appropriate that Thrawn can't look down too far. Of course, I always think of Imperials as having quite a sort of a high sort of eye line, you know, sort of their attitudes. But yes, he's not really tipping backwards and forwards. A little bit of a gesture there with the chin. Very tight side to side, I have to say. A little bit better there to the left, tight to the right, but I can get there. He does hold it. It's not going to sort of flop around or anything like that. Some articulation points, they kind of want to snap back to neutral. He does hold those positions quite nicely, even though they are a little bit stiffer to articulate there around. There is a tiny little, I think it was an air bubble in the paint that has popped just there on the neck. So it looks like a little circular mark just on the blue paint just above the collar. Again, very minor, but I'm looking at everything a close-up. We also have just a couple of little black flecks that caught my eye across the figure. And I notice we've got a tiny one here on the cheek, a little one here on the collar. We've got one here on the chest, one here on the hip, and I don't know if there's any others. Those were just the ones that caught my attention straight off. It's just, I know every now and again you're going to get those tiny, tiny little paint flaws. I did order this one online. It was very hard to find here in New Zealand, so I didn't have the opportunity to see this one in person or indeed compare multiples alongside each other. So tiny, tiny flecks. They barely show up on camera, and I'm probably going to completely forget about them once I put him on a display. So very minor. Okay, let's move down to the tunic. I love the white for Grand Admiral Thrawn, of course, going all the way back to the book art. And of course, they kept some details really true to those original book art cover designs. So for Rebels, we've got some really fun details. We've got these sort of collar little designs there, the sort of little badges on his collar, the arrows pointing either way, painted in silver. They are sculpted and raised, and they are painted. It looks quite tidy. They do align there to the 3D painting there quite nicely. We've got the code cylinders, 2 on either side with a dark blue top to them. Now looking at it kind of from an angle, it's not really the top, it's kind of painted like the top, but if I'm looking top down, that's actually still just white like the plastic. It's very hard to sort of focus. You can kind of see there, it's not sort of fully to the top, but I understand that if it was going over the top, more towards this angle, it would probably have spilled or somehow gotten on the white tunic. So looking from the front, it looks really nice and tidy. And of course, we've got his Grand Admiral rank badge there. Silver badge with the dark blue, yellow, and red rank badge rectangles there. Really nice and tidy. Very nice. So we've got, again, if I'm looking at it from the side, that rank badge edge is white. Looking at it from those sides, but the top and bottom on these ones are actually silver. So looking at the top of that rank badge, it's silver, but looking at the side, it's white. So again, I guess they're just trying to be very tidy, because those are just those real sort of tidy aspects. You want to look pristine. If the paint's all over the place, it kind of throws you off. You know, what's an Imperial with an untidy rank badge? Now we do have some gold sort of shoulder, sort of epaulette details here. It's not a really sort of true sort of gold, like metallic finish. It's just kind of, it's a little bit of a gold color, I would say, more than that. And unfortunately, because of course we have to have a bit of a cutout for the articulation of the sleeve, the gold kind of looks a little bit cut off at the sleeves here. We've just kind of got the white cut out, because of course these sleeves have to be sculpted differently to the chest, so we just get a little bit of sort of that cut edge there. But I don't really think that you would actually fully go gold down, because that's not how they appear on screen. So just a little bit interesting. I can kind of see, like, I feel like I can see just a little bit of like a brush line to it, just a really bit faint right here on this front edge. And just the way that the paint's kind of caught on the edge, just really minimally. Other than that, really tidy. Again, one of those kind of details that's really going to catch your eye if it's wrong. So I'm glad that all of his officer sort of details here on his Imperial sort of officer. I say officer, that's because I always think of Imperial officer. Of course, he's Grand Admiral, but I really like all of his details there, looking really sharp, really nice, because of course it's predominantly just a white tunic and pants. So these details really have to shine, because they're going to draw the eye if they're wrong. So let's go quickly move down to the last couple of details on his costume, moving his arms out of the way there. We have the black belt there with a really nice silver belt buckle here. We've got the silver dome off to the left-hand side there. I like those little details there. And of course, we've got a holster here for that one included blaster pistol that we're going to check out there. Now, it almost looks like this has been applied separately. Sometimes the holsters are sculpted as sort of a one piece with the lower part of the tunic or a shirt or whatever. But the way that this little sort of almost like a rivet looks here, and just looking down the sides, you can see that it's actually attached to his tunic there, just sort of pulling that up, which is nice to see. Sometimes it can look really clumsy. I know it kind of keeps it flat and tighter to the body. If the holster is actually sculpted as part of the lower tunic, generally they're made out of the same materials, because if this is rubbery and flexible, this is often, you know, if it's rubbery, then it helps to get the blaster accessories in and out. But it's really interesting that this appears to actually be fully sculpted separately and attached on there. So we've got really crisp lines, because of course when something's applied between black and white, we would really notice if the paint is a little bit sort of overlapping there. But because they're made separately, there's absolutely no worries about getting a black and white paint where it shouldn't be. So this is really nice and tidy. It's got sort of a bit of a hard edge to it, I have to say. It actually feels like it's made out of a much more rigid plastic than the lower tunic, which I wasn't expecting. I thought I'd be able to sort of squeeze it. I'm kind of squeezing it just a little bit more from the tunic. We can see that it is hollow. You can see through there. So that should help us be able to get our blaster in and out. Sometimes the barrel just kind of just peeks out through the bottom there as well. And the belt is nice and tidy across the back there. Not too much else in terms of the detail. Now on the vintage collection Thrawn, it kind of drew my eye that the top of the belt was not painted in black. And on that figure, it was kind of a bit thick. Looking here, this one's a lot tidier, but I do see the top of the belt isn't quite fully painted in black. Just a little bit here. I can just sort of see. It's very hard to show. I'm looking up very up close. You can kind of see that it's, we can see that white plastic, because of course the belt is part of this section here, and a little bit around the back, just along the top. I'm kind of looking more in than I am across the top, but I have to say this is a tidier paint job than the belt on my vintage collection version of the one that I recently opened up. But yeah, tidy paint, looks nice. I like the whatever the black that they've used for the belt. It's almost not like, it's not a gloss black. It's almost different to what the black that they've used here. It's kind of that slightly muted black that just gives it a very realistic leather look. There's even a subtle sort of leather crease texture to the surface of this belt. It really looks like somebody made a tiny little leather or faux leather belt and put it on this figure, and I really love that. When something tricks your eye and makes you think that it's made out of the material that it is used on the original costume, I think that that's really clever. And this belt, the surface texture of this belt doesn't look like plastic, it looks like leather, and I think that that's really clever. So of course, can't quite say the same for the tunic. It doesn't look like fabric. We've got some really good sculpting here. We've got some texture to it. But when you look at most clothes, there is a really fine grain, a sort of a little surface pattern with the way that fabric is woven. That's just never, it's too fine to replicate on plastic toys. So you kind of get this subtle all over kind of mottled texture, which, you know, to make it sure that it doesn't just look like a shiny, solid plastic toy. So we've got sort of creases and we've got an overall texture, but it doesn't quite look like fabric. I do really like the seam lines that we have here in the back, of course, being accurate to sort of imperial uniforms here with the curved seams running up to the back. Though I have to say, if I recall correctly, I think that the seams on the back of the Rebels version of Thrawn go up to the shoulders here, whereas sort of live action, running back to the original trilogy, the sort of Imperial officers, Tarkin and the like, have seams that come into the shoulder here. So I feel like this seam line is not accurate to the version of Rebels, and I will have to check some of my other action figures to see if that is true, but that's how my mind reads that the Rebels version had the seams that come up and sort of match up here rather than curving. So that's kind of interesting that we have that there. We do have the seam running down the back of the sleeves, which of course is accurate there for the sleeves of these tunics. And we've got one running down the front here as well, because of course they're based off sort of military garb, which has very formal ways of construction and stuff like that. I like the seams down the front. Of course, the tunics kind of have these panels that overlap each other, and because of course the tunics run down at the thighs to help with articulation, we have splits running up the lower half here. This is kind of why these parts are rubbery, so that we can sort of flex them around the legs so we can still get articulation. Thrawn, I don't think he's going to be doing much in the terms of acrobatic high kicks when it comes to my posing. He's probably going to be standing a little bit sort of serenely contemplative, scheming up his next battle plan. But we do still have these sort of splits up the side. I kind of have a love-hate relationship to these. They always look very much like toy features rather than sort of being accurate to the original one. I do understand their importance because we want to be able to move our figures, tweak their posing for, you know, the photos and the displays that we want to do. But sometimes, depends on your figure, sometimes the splits sit very wide and they just look, they kind of are a little bit jarring, I think. These ones are not too bad. I like that this one is sitting really nice and tight behind the holster there, so it just about disappears. This one points towards the back, so it is a little bit more hidden from the front than if that was straight. I like the fact that it is angled down towards the back there. But of course, these splits are not a part of the original tunic. So they're just kind of that sort of toy element that does kind of grab your attention a little bit because they're not present on the original costume. I say costume, I know it's an animated series, but you know, the way that it is designed to look like clothes on screen. Running down to the legs. Now we can see through these splits here at the side. If I just move the arm out of the way, we do have those upper thigh angles there, so we can rotate the thighs, and from the front it's actually hidden just above the hemline of the tunic, so I like that. You only really see it at the back. The tunics are a little bit shorter here in the back, so we can see those lines, but they are completely hidden from the front, which is nice, just sort of minimizing a few less cutouts, even though of course we do have these things here in the knees. And now they're gonna be stiff, I think. Oh, very stiff actually. Some rotate nicely. That is quite a fight, I have to say. That one moves a little bit easier. I'm really having to grip there. This one, that's a fight. Oh, there it goes. It's got a little bit of a click to it, but I can rotate the legs there. So let's do a quick test and see how wide we can get to the thighs here. Getting his arms out of the way. So don't really have a dewback or anything for him to ride. You can kind of see how high that split is going. We do have a circular sort of top to that to try and avoid this split from running up further. Of course, we're generally going to hit the belt, but I really do get anxious about creating any splits in those, because once you've split beyond those notches, it's just going to keep getting worse if you sort of test its limits anymore. But that was about as much to the side as I was expecting. Okay, so this is kind of tight. That's about as high as I'm willing to stress this particular figure. I've already got that split open about as wide as I want it to go. Now we do have a very solid holster on this particular thigh that I think is doing a lot, because it's not really bending through here. It's pretty much still straight. So that is restricting that particular leg on this side. You can see without the holster, I can go all the way up. Now that's splitting that curve. Again, that's quite a severe opening there, but because of the split, it is a toy, we do get the articulation that we would want. If we want to do some sort of kicks or things like that, we can get his thigh all the way up. So unfortunately, that holster does limit that right leg there. Now let's test out the knees. I'm not a fan of this articulation style, particularly if I do just any kind of tip back. We get these kind of, they look like plastic sticks inserted in the front of his boots. I don't like this section here. It just doesn't look right. If you kind of get it all the way down there in the front, it kind of looks a little bit more like wrinkled pants and stuff like that. But as soon as you tip it towards the back, you get these really awkward sort of articulation points. And I know that that is part of the modern style, but because we've already got these cutouts and everything, it just starts drawing my eye in sort of unfavorable ways. So you can see we do get some really tight, oh, he's quite tight. The articulation of this sort of kneecap style means that we can move the lower leg up much higher. With just the sort of modern articulation, we generally get more of sort of that just straight square angle. We can go much tighter with this sort of kneecap style. But when you start looking at it, it just, oh, I don't like it. It just starts to look very much like a toy and not like a person anymore, with this sort of floating kneecap in between these two articulation points. I don't know that I need that much articulation in my figures. When it starts to really sort of lose the character, you know, it starts looking very much like a raw toy, if that makes sense. And because Imperials have these kind of military style jodhpur pants that flare out on the outer thighs, the articulation pegs are quite recessed, so they really do look like deep holes. And now his costume is black and white, so it does a pretty good job of sort of hiding the articulation point, because the second peg down here is almost invisible on these boots. The black on black hides it very well. It's kind of cutting into the strap detail though across the top of these boots. You can kind of see this really nice buckle detail right next to that hole there for the peg, and I don't like that. We're really losing. You might be able to see it a little bit better there. It's just cutting straight into that strap detail on the boot there, which is a shame. I don't like that. But the boots look nice. We've got sort of a nice matte finish to it, not true gloss. I would maybe prefer them to be a little bit more high shine. When I think of sort of the polished riding boots of Imperials, I think maybe Thrawn would have slightly glossier boots, but I don't mind. I like the wrinkles here with the leather around the ankles. We've got that strap detail, unfortunately a little bit cut off. You can see the way that it sort of flows on there from the back. I don't know, again, that this detail is present on the animated series. Rebels had a very stylized animation style, and I don't know that this buckle detail is present on Thrawn's outfit in the animated show, but then this is a realistic interpretation, so I'll give them leeway for sort of adding some realistic details there to the costume. We've also got this very deep cutout in the back of the knees, which again, I'm not the biggest fan of. But the rest of the boots, let's just check out the ankles. I'm expecting them to be a bit tight. Oh, very tight. I'm bending his knee rather than his ankle. How far? Wow, okay. That's quite tight. I have to say, sometimes figures are just tight straight out of the box, and it takes a little bit of time to really get them into position, but that's a little bit more of a wrestling match that I'm used to. That's a little bit better on this side. You can see how sort of pointed we can get there with the ankle, but I have to say, when it comes to ankles, there's a sort of a fine point between too tight and too sort of loose, because of course we want our figures to stand up very robustly, and because his ankles are tight, he is completely robust. Just a quick back to sort of neutral and he stands up really well. Very, very solid, and I like that. I don't worry about this guy tipping over at all. Very nice. Okay, let's do a quick check of his arms there. So that one actually flicked up pretty easily compared to his lower legs there. And let's just check his arms. So we do have, of course, this little bit of a gap here because, of course, the torso and the sleeves have to be separate to allow for articulation. This arm, very stiff. Okay, let's test this one out. Yep, stiff, but we can get all the way up to there, which is good, because he does have a blaster accessory, and I like the articulation in the arms to really tweak a convincing sort of blaster hold. That's the angle there on the elbows. I like the sculpting on the sleeves. We've got the sort of fabric sort of coming down a little bit lower in the back, and of course when the arms are bent, all of the articulation is hidden behind the elbow, which is nice there. I like the blue of his hands, but to be honest, when I get it a little bit close, you can see that there is a difference. Now, I would think that this is all made out of blue plastic, and I'm pretty sure, because looking up under the hair you can kind of see the blue plastic, but there's something that looks different about his blue hands to his blue face, even though they should be made out of the same blue plastic. I don't know, there's just like a tone or something, like maybe a slightly different batch of blue plastic made for these two pieces. So I think the hands look just a little bit different. Or they've like applied like a subtle spray on his face or something just to change the tone of it. It's just a little bit different. That's a very stiff arm, but I kind of wish that, you know, action figures could fold their arms. I'm not really going to ever get to that pose in this particular scale and figure. That's about as tight in as to the body as I can get his elbows, and you can see I can get his hands. If I had a lightsaber, he would be able to hold a lightsaber with two hands, but I'm not really going to get a crossed arm sort of position here. But I do like the sculpting position of his hands. This one here, we've got a separate trigger finger, which should be good for holding his blaster pistol, and we'll check that out soon. Now this one I kind of wish was perhaps not quite so accessory focused as a grip. Sometimes I feel like they need a little bit more of like a neutral hand, especially when the character doesn't have anything else to hold. We have one accessory, and I don't think he's going to be holding it in this hand. This hand doesn't have a separate trigger finger. It's all sculpted with his hands. We'll test it in both hands just to see. That really did hurt moving his ankles. Very stiff joints in this lower body. I have to say, I'm glad he's so sturdy for standing up though, but I wasn't expecting those to actually be that hard to move. So let's just take, oh, I forgot to look at his waist articulation. So sometimes we have the articulation through the center torso, but because we don't really have any way to hide that, we've got it at the waist, at the belt, the sort of the original sort of sculpting place. So, okay, that's actually nice. I was wondering if he might fight me a little bit on that, but I can turn him to the side. He doesn't swing back as soon as I let go. It's not clicking, and I do actually get a nice amount of backwards and forwards bending there as well. So I actually really like that. Very nice. It's holding position if I bend them back and I bend them forward, which I like to see. Sometimes they just want to snap back to neutral, which doesn't really help when you're trying to pose them on your shelf. You need them to hold where you put them. But yes, we can see that we have also the sort of the ability to swivel both hands there, and we can see those articulation points. We're going to get a little bit of an up and down motion on his right hand. Sometimes the sleeve ends on tunics do cut in to the amount that we can actually move the hands. I'm finding that a little bit on this one. This one rotates, and we've also got a little bit of a front back with that articulation there. But it's holding it a little bit, not a lot, but about as much as I would hope to have out of the hand. So I think that is all the articulation. Let's get him holding his blaster pistol. Grand Admiral Thrawn, it comes with one accessory, a small dark metallic toned blaster pistol, and I really like this one. We've got some really nice detail. It's not too flat either. It's actually got a little bit of body to it. We've even got a cutout here, and an enclosed trigger guard. A little bit of a squarish shape there, but I'm hoping his extended finger is going to fit in there nicely. I like the pointed ends. Feels sort of a little bit, I don't know, a little bit more stylized, maybe a little bit more artistic, shall we say, for Thrawn. I like that. It doesn't look like sort of a standard Imperial blaster pistol there. Really nice. And I like the dark metallic finish there as well. It really picks up a lot of the details. So I'm hoping that this is going to fit into his hands well. So he looks like he's got a good grip here, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a wrestle to get their fingers. Sometimes you have to kind of pull their fingers around to try and get them in there. So just see, because this one's got a little bit of a wider grip than some other blaster pistols from the Black Series range. So I'm hoping that this is going to fit into his hands. Trying to hold his hand straight. Oh, that was nice. That just went in there and his finger hooked straight in there. I didn't need to try and sort of pull the finger back and get that into position. He holds that well, and that's a really nice position there with the hand. Really nice. Looks cool. Of course, he's got such blue hands. Very striking. We can clearly see that trigger finger there in the guard. It's really nice. I like that angular thumb there as well. Looks quite natural. Sometimes when a certain action figure is holding accessories, they look a little bit sort of odd, but the position there in his hand looks really nice. So I'll quickly check it in his other hand, though I don't think it's going to go in the other hand quite as nice because we don't have that extended trigger finger, but we'll just test it out because this one does have a grip like it wants to, like it's designed to hold this one. So, okay, so yeah, it went into his hand well. Again, but we don't have that separation of the top trigger finger, so it can't slot into the grip. But he can hold it, and it looks fairly convincing, which is a little bit unusual. I like that. From the outside, it kind of looks like he's just resting his finger, not quite on the trigger. You can kind of see on this side, we don't really have anything inserting through that guard. His finger is stopped before it, but there's actually a much more convincing grip on it with his left hand than I've seen for some other figures. Sometimes you can see that it's not really ever supposed to hold the included accessory with their other hand, but let's just check it out in his holster here as well. So I'm hoping that because we've got that gap there at the bottom, it's going to look pretty cool. Yep, that pointed tip extends just below there, really nice and tight on that line there. And I like that we can still see a good amount of the detail on that blaster pistol. It looks really nice. I like that it's a dark metallic, just stands out a little bit more against the black of the holster there. Really nice. So I'm not sure which way around I'm going to have it. I think I actually kind of really like it in the holster because of course Thrawn's a little bit more of a leader and a strategist. Of course he does have a sidearm there, but I'm thinking because I can't get his arms to cross, I might have what feels like sort of a bit more of a thinking pose where he sort of stands there. Something about this pose in particular makes me think of Grand Admiral Thrawn in Rebels, where he's sort of strategizing in his office about how to take down the rebellion. I like this pose, and I think this gives sort of a commanding presence without, because of course we can't cross his arms in front of his chest or perhaps even sort of raise his finger or something like that to his face in contemplation. I think this looks kind of cool, and it's very easily achievable. Of course, it does look just a little bit awkward there in the back because he's not really holding his hands together or anything like that. But from the front, I think that looks really cool. And then we just have the accessory tucked neatly into his holster. So overall, I like this figure. I was a little bit anxious when I opened it up. I wasn't sure if I was going to like all of the details because I could see just a few little flecks, and I am looking up really close. That's part of sort of the journey of going through and sort of unboxing my figures and looking up everything really up close, going over all of the details. The articulation is very stiff in the lower body, but good in the upper body. So we've got very sturdy, very stable legs there because I'm not going to do high kicks, and I've got the maneuverability that I would expect from a Black Series figure at the front here. I've got his elbow bent a little bit awkwardly there. I'll finesse that later. But yeah, since I can't get a Black Series figure to cross their arms, and I'm not really expecting it to, I think this looks pretty cool. I love the accessory. The paintwork on his very important costume details is all very nicely done, all accurately painted, very nice. I love the fact that this archive version has an improvement on the original face paint of the earlier versions. That digital printing is really nice, and actually looking at it up close, I think the eyebrows are a very dark blue rather than a black. They looked a little, I don't want to say comical, but they were very striking, like sort of black Sharpie or something on earlier versions. I like the subtlety because his eyebrows are, you know, they're very expressive on Grand Admiral Thrawn. They are not just sort of there. He doesn't have a neutral expression. We can see that his right eyebrow is raised compared to this one here on the left. So I like that because it's really drawing the eye there. I like the detail with his red eyes there, and of course we've just got that little bit of lip accent there as well. Overall, I like this figure a little bit better than I was a little bit worried, because of course I'm not a fan of the older style of articulation of the legs, as I'm sure I've mentioned a few times. But I love Grand Admiral Thrawn, and I really wanted to have a Black Series version in my collection. I wasn't able to get my hands on that Comic-Con one, and I wouldn't have wanted to open that one anyway. That's just too much of a fantastic packaging. He would live in the packaging, and I wanted to have one out to add to my action figure display. So I'm glad that I was able to get the archive version, because I think even now, if I could track down the black and red box version of the Black Series 6-inch version of Thrawn, I would keep it in its box. So I'm glad I have this archive version to open up, go over all of the really cool details, try out some cool poses, and add him to my loose Black Series action figure display. So I'm really happy with this figure. It's probably not, you know, the perfect version of Thrawn. I know that now, because of course Thrawn appears in the live action Ahsoka series, we're going to have a live action version of Grand Admiral Thrawn as we see him in the Ahsoka series coming out in the Black Series line and the Vintage Collection line. I really can't wait to get that one and see how it compares to this one side by side. Of course, there are some differences in his appearance, his skin color, and a few other details. It's really going to be fun, and I can't wait to get my hands on that one, because I want to build out as many of the Thrawn figures as I can. So I'm keen to get that one, and I can't wait till it releases. At this point, it's still slated for next year, so a little bit of a wait, hopefully not too much longer. This was really fun. I'm really enjoying getting hold of the archive Black Series figures so I can open them without worrying about taking figures out of their boxes. There's just something about that packaging makes it feels like here's the bare bones, you can open it up and you don't need to worry about it. So really happy to finally have this Grand Admiral Thrawn figure in my collection. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars collectible, checked out all of the details, and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Black Series fan, I've also opened up the Chopper figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Black Series unboxing playlist. This is the way.